The rope that creaked in Marcus Garvey Park on that September morning in 1946 had sent a message across Harlem. Bumpy Johnson had answered it. The KKK cell was gone, burned to ash and memory, and for a time, Harlem breathed easier. But power never stays still. When one threat disappears, another one is already moving into the space it left behind. And in 1947, the threat that moved into that space wore a silk suit, spoke with a Sicilian accent, and had the entire New York underworld in his pocket. His name was Charles Luciano, Lucky Luciano, the man who had reorganized American organized crime the way a general reorganizes an army. He'd built the Commission, the governing body of the five families, turned chaos into structure, turned violence into business. By 1947, even from his exile in Italy, his reach extended across the Atlantic and into every borough of New York City. His men ran the docks, the numbers, the narcotics, the protection rackets. They ran everything. And they had decided, quietly and with the confidence of men who had never been told no, that it was time to run Harlem too. Bumpy Johnson had built something in Harlem that most people didn't fully understand. It wasn't just a criminal organization. It was a system of protection. He ran the numbers, yes. He controlled the streets, yes. But he also made sure that the butcher on 125th Street didn't get shaken down by men who didn't belong there. He made sure that a mother walking home at midnight got home safely. He made sure that Harlem's money, as much as possible, stayed in Harlem. That was the arrangement. That was the understanding. And for years, the Italian families had respected it, not out of affection, but out of pragmatism. Bumpy was too entrenched, too respected, too dangerous to move against without cost. But Lucky Luciano was not a man who accepted permanent arrangements. The boy's name was Marcus Webb. He was 14 years old, the son of a woman named Clara Webb, who ran a small laundromat on Lenox Avenue. Clara had been a friend of Bumpy's since childhood, one of those friendships that survive decades and distance, and the kind of life choices that separate people. When Clara's husband died of tuberculosis in 1944, Bumpy had quietly made sure the laundromat stayed open, that the bills got paid, that Marcus had shoes for school. He never made a show of it. That wasn't his way. But Marcus knew, and Clara knew. And in Harlem, that kind of knowing matters. Marcus was a smart kid, thin, serious-faced, the kind of boy who read everything he could get his hands on and asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. He reminded Bumpy of Thomas in ways that he never said out loud. Same hunger in the eyes, same sense that the world was bigger than the block he'd been born on, and that he was going to find his way into it. On a Tuesday afternoon in March 1947, Marcus was running an errand for his mother, carrying a bag of change from the laundromat to the bank 3 blocks away. He was on 128th Street when 2 men stepped out of a black Cadillac and told him to get in the car. They weren't asking. Marcus was smart enough to know that screaming wouldn't help, and dumb enough to be brave about it anyway. He dropped the bag and ran. He made it half a block before the third man, the one he hadn't seen, caught him from behind and dragged him into the car. The Cadillac pulled away from the curb and disappeared into traffic. Bumpy heard about it 40 minutes later. Illinois Gordon came into the office on 116th Street with his hat in his hands and his face arranged in the careful blankness that meant the news was bad. Bumpy listened without interrupting. When Illinois finished, Bumpy sat very still for a moment. Who took him? Illinois hesitated. Word on the street says it was Genovese's men. Vito's crew. Bumpy nodded slowly. Vito Genovese was Luciano's most aggressive lieutenant, a man who had murdered his way up through the organization and who had been pushing for expansion into Harlem for 2 years. This wasn't random. This was a message. The same way Thomas's death had been a message, this was a message. Different sender, same language. We can reach anyone you care about. We can take anything you value. Now come to the table and give us what we want. Bumpy stood up and put on his coat. Where are you going? Illinois asked. To find out where they're keeping him. The network that Bumpy had built over 20 years in Harlem was not just muscle and money. It was information. Every cab driver, every numbers runner, every woman who cleaned offices in buildings where powerful men had conversations, every bartender who poured drinks while men talked too loudly, all of them fed information into a system that Bumpy had constructed with the patience of an architect. Within 3 hours, he knew that Marcus Webb was being held in a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, under the watch of 4 Genovese soldiers. He knew the address. He knew the layout. He knew that a man named Sal Ferraro was running the operation on the ground, and that Ferraro had been told to wait for a phone call before doing anything further. That phone call was the message. Come negotiate. Come to the table. Acknowledge that Harlem belongs to us now. Bumpy did not go to Brooklyn that night. He did something that surprised everyone who knew him. He made a phone call to a man named Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky was the financial genius behind the commission, the man who had helped Luciano build the structure that made organized crime in America function like a corporation. He was also, unlike most of the men around him, someone who operated on logic rather than ego. Bumpy had done business with Lansky twice before, small things, but enough to establish a line of communication, enough to be taken seriously. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Bumpy explained the situation without emotion, the way you explain a business problem to an accountant. A child had been taken. The child was under his protection. He wanted the child returned. In exchange, he was willing to discuss the expansion question that Luciano's people had been raising. Discuss, not concede. There was a difference. Lansky listened. Then he said he would make some calls. Bumpy hung up and waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the things that made him dangerous. Most men, when they were afraid or angry, moved too fast. Bumpy had learned, through years of prison and streets and loss, that the man who controls his timing controls the situation. At 11 p.m., Ferraro called. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost friendly, the way a man sounds when he thinks he has all the cards. Mr. Johnson, I think it's time we had a conversation about the future of your operation. Bumpy's voice was quiet. I think you should put the boy on the phone. A pause. Then Marcus's voice, scared but trying not to show it. Mr. Bumpy? Are you hurt? No, sir. Good. Be calm. You'll be home tonight. Ferraro came back on the line. That's a very confident statement for a man in your position. My position, Bumpy said, is that I'm sitting in my office in Harlem, which is where I've been for 20 years, and which is where I'll be for 20 more. Your position is that you're holding a 14-year-old boy in a warehouse in Red Hook, which means you've already made a mistake that your boss doesn't know about yet. Ferraro's voice hardened. What does that mean? It means that Lucky Luciano is a businessman, and businessmen don't like it when their employees create problems that cost more than they're worth. Call him. Ask him if he approved this specific move. Ask him if Meyer Lansky has spoken to him tonight. Then call me back. Bumpy hung up. He sat in the dark office and thought about Thomas, about the oak tree in Marcus Garvey Park, about the way power worked, the way it always worked, through fear and through the willingness to absorb cost. The KKK had underestimated the cost. They had thought that Harlem would absorb the terror, would swallow it, would go quiet. They had been wrong. Luciano's men were making a similar calculation. They were assuming that Bumpy would weigh the risk of war against the Genovese family and decide that the boy wasn't worth it. They were assuming that Bumpy's protection had limits. They were wrong about that too. But Bumpy was not going to war if he didn't have to. War was expensive. War killed people who didn't deserve to die. War left Harlem exposed. The move he had made with Lansky was better. It was the move Thomas would have made. The lawyer's move, finding the leverage that existed within the system rather than burning the system down. Sometimes you burn it down. Sometimes you find the pressure point and you press it. Ferraro called back 45 minutes later. His voice was different now. Flatter. The friendliness was gone, and so was the hardness. What was left was the voice of a man who had just been told by his superiors that he had overstepped. The boy will be released tonight. Bumpy said nothing. Mr. Luciano, Ferraro continued, would like to arrange a meeting. A proper meeting, to discuss the Harlem situation like professionals. Bumpy let the silence stretch for a moment. Tell Mr. Luciano that I'm available Thursday, and tell him that the next time one of his men puts a hand on someone under my protection, the conversation we have won't be at a table. He hung up. Marcus Webb was dropped off in front of his mother's laundromat at 1:15 in the morning. Clara opened the door and pulled her son inside and held him for a long time. Bumpy stood across the street in the shadow of a doorway and watched. He didn't go over. He didn't need to. This wasn't about being seen. This was about something being made right. The meeting with Luciano's representatives happened Thursday, as arranged, in a restaurant in Little Italy that served as neutral ground for these kinds of conversations. Bumpy came alone, which was either a show of confidence or a show of contempt, and the men across the table weren't sure which. Sal Ferraro was not there. He had been reassigned to something in New Jersey, which was the organization's way of acknowledging that he had created a problem. The man who sat across from Bumpy was older, quieter, a consigliere named Enzo Battaglia, who had been with Luciano since the 20s. He had the manner of a professor, careful and precise, and he spoke about Harlem the way a real estate developer speaks about a neighborhood he wants to acquire. Mr. Luciano's position, Battaglia said, is that the current arrangement is inefficient. Harlem generates significant revenue. The commission believes that revenue should flow through proper channels. Bumpy listened. Then he said, Harlem generates significant revenue because Harlem trusts the people who run it. The moment you put commission oversight on Harlem's operations, that trust disappears. The numbers dry up. The cooperation disappears. You'd be buying a machine and then removing the part that makes it run. Battaglia considered this. And your proposal? The arrangement stays as it is. Bumpy controls Harlem's operations. A percentage, a fair percentage, flows to the commission as a courtesy, not as tribute, as partnership. In exchange, commission muscle stays out of Harlem unless I ask for it. And nobody, Bumpy said, and his voice was very quiet now, nobody touches anyone under my protection again. Not a runner, not a shopkeeper, not a 14-year-old boy carrying his mother's laundry money to the bank. Battaglia was quiet for a moment. And if the commission finds these terms unacceptable, then we have a different kind of conversation. And that conversation will be expensive for everyone at this table and everyone connected to them. I've been in Harlem for 20 years. I know every street, every building, every person. I know where things are kept and how they move and who moves them. A war in Harlem would cost the commission more than Harlem is worth. I'm offering you a better deal. Take it. The meeting ended without a handshake, which was fine. Handshakes were for men who needed the ritual. What mattered was the understanding, and the understanding had been reached. 3 weeks later, Bumpy received a message through Lansky. The commission had accepted the terms. Harlem would remain under Bumpy's control. The percentage arrangement was agreed upon, and Sal Ferraro, the message noted almost as an afterthought, had decided to retire from the organization entirely. Bumpy read the message, folded it, and put it in his desk drawer. Illinois Gordon was watching from across the room. So it's done? It's done. Illinois shook his head slowly. You went up against Lucky Luciano and came out with a better deal than you had before. Bumpy looked out the window at 116th Street, at the people moving through the afternoon, the women with groceries, the men playing dominoes outside the barbershop, the children running between parked cars. His Harlem, the thing he had spent his life building and protecting. I didn't go up against Luciano, Bumpy said. I reminded him that Harlem isn't a territory, it's a community, and communities fight differently than organizations do. Organizations fight for profit, communities fight for survival. There's no percentage calculation that beats that. Illinois was quiet for a moment. And the boy? Marcus? Bumpy stood up, reached for his coat. He's going to be fine. Smart kid. Reminds me of someone. He didn't say who. He didn't need to. That evening, Bumpy walked to Clara Webb's laundromat on Lenox Avenue. He went in through the back, the way he always did, and sat at the small table where Clara kept a coffee pot running all day. Marcus was doing homework at the counter, a thick textbook open in front of him, his pencil moving steadily across a notebook page. Bumpy sat down across from Clara and accepted the coffee she poured without being asked. They talked about small things for a while, the way old friends do, the neighborhood, the weather, a cousin who had moved to Philadelphia. Then Clara looked at him with the directness that had always been one of her best qualities. Is it over? It's over. She nodded. Thank you, Bumpy. He looked over at Marcus, still bent over his textbook, the pencil moving. What's he studying? Clara smiled. History. He loves history. Wants to understand how things got to be the way they are. Bumpy watched the boy for a moment. Good, he said finally. A man who understands history understands power, and a man who understands power can change things. He finished his coffee, said good night, and walked back out into Harlem. The street was alive around him, music from an open window somewhere above, the smell of food from a restaurant down the block, voices and laughter, and the ordinary beautiful noise of people living their lives in a place they had built for themselves. He walked slowly, the way a man walks when he's not going anywhere in particular, just moving through something he loves. Lucky Luciano's men had pointed guns at a boy to make a point about power. Bumpy had answered not with guns, but with something sharper, with patience, with information, with the understanding that real power doesn't announce itself. It simply makes itself felt, quietly, completely, in ways that leave no room for argument. The KKK had learned that lesson in September 1946. Lucky Luciano's organization had learned it in March 1947. And Harlem, which had been watching both lessons from the windows and the stoops and the barbershops and the church steps, had filed them away in the way that communities file away the things that keep them alive. Touch Harlem's children, and Harlem will answer, not always with fire, sometimes with something colder, something that reaches further, something that makes even the most powerful men in the most powerful organizations in the country pick up the phone and quietly tell their soldiers to stand down. That was Bumpy Johnson, not a saint, not a hero in any simple sense, but something that Harlem needed and that the law had never been willing to be. A man who kept his promises, a man who made the cost of crossing him higher than anyone wanted to pay. A man who understood that justice, real justice, is not a system. It's a decision, made every day, by someone willing to bear the weight of it. Marcus Webb graduated from high school in 1951. He went to City College on a scholarship. He became a history teacher. He taught in Harlem for 30 years. And every year on the first day of class, he told his students the same thing. He told them that power is not given. It is built, slowly, carefully, through trust, and through the willingness to protect the people around you. He never said where he learned that, but he knew. And some of his students, the ones who paid attention, could see it in his eyes when he said it. The weight of a memory, the shape of a debt that had been paid in full.